Hi, I'm David Steen. Welcome to my channel. This channel is all about just telling stories, real life stories, events that happened to me personally in all my many years of growing up and even in my adult life. They're real stories, they're clean stories, and most of them have a moral at the end of it. So if you think you like that, just stick around. I'm sitting here in my house, my 104-year-old house, and behind me there is my wife's china cabinet that's been handed down through generations, so nobody even knows how old it is. But today I want to talk about a story that happened when I was a kid, and I'll just call it the Junkhouse and the Heater. Now when I was a kid, probably 8 or 10 years old, that's probably back around the early 60s, something like that, my father and my uncle somehow were able to tear down an old house that had been around for 100 years and salvage all the lumber that was in it so they could build some structures they wanted. I think my uncle built a small barn or something, I'm not sure, can't really remember. But my father built a little building, I guess just to store stuff in, and we always referred to it as the junk house. Now this junk house was about 100 feet or so behind our house, and it was about 20 feet long, something like that, probably 8 or 10 feet deep or wide, whatever. And it had a window on each end, and it had in the center of each end, and it had a door in the center of one side. Now these windows, they're only like, I don't know, a couple of feet wide, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, something like that. And I think they're called 2-over-2 windows. I'll try to find an image and put it up so you kind of get an idea of what I was talking about. Now since this junk house was built out of reclaimed lumber that was very, very old, it was all rough cut. And there's no tongue and groove, there's no laps on it like, you know, shiplap or something on the siding of a house. These boards were basically just stacked up on top of each other and nailed onto the studs. So since the lumber was rough cut and very old, it had some gaps in it here and there. Fortunately, rain didn't really come into it, and it was a junk house, didn't matter if it got wet, but it had a very good roof on it that kept all the rain out. Now when I was probably, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, something like that, a neighbor of mine about a quarter mile down the road, my old buddy Jack, and we're still good friends to this day, even though we live, I don't know, thousands of miles apart. But we loved to camp out, and our parents for some reason didn't mind it. So in the summertime when the weather was nice and it wasn't raining, we would camp out on the back of our 17.5 acres where we had a little spot that we had cleaned up, and we were trying to build a little log cabin on it. I don't think we ever finished it. Had us a nice little fire pit, and we could be out there by ourselves and just do what boys do, which is mostly dumb. When the weather was bad, either raining or cold or whatever, then we wouldn't stay out in our little, quote, campground. We would stay in the junk house. Now we had decorated this junk house up and made it special just for us to camp out in. And in one end of it, we had some, we call them our bunks, but they were really just hammocks. I don't know where we got some kind of old material. And we made 3 hammocks and we put them on top of each other, so we called them our bunks. And they were just suspended from each wall. Occasionally we'd have another one of our buddies come camp out with us, and so that's why we had 3 of them. We got a bright idea one time when it was kind of cold that we had on somewhere on that 17.5 acres that we had a gas well. And so me and my father ran a gas line. I remember it was about 700 feet. We dug a ditch and we buried this line, and we ran a gas line from the well to the house. Now probably about 100 feet from the house, I guess my father had some future plans for something. He put in a spare valve that you could attach something to, but we never did attach it. There wasn't another outbuilding or something. I really don't know why he put that there. But my old buddy Jack and I knew that valve was there. So one night we got the bright idea that since there's a gas line that was only about 150 feet or so from the junk house, and there was actually an old space heater in the junk house, I guess just being stored there or something. We had this brilliant idea that we were going to run us some natural gas and we were going to attach it to this space heater and have us some heat in the junk house. My father had 5-gallon buckets full of all kinds of plumbing fittings and nuts and bolts and washers and screws and nails, and you name it, it was in there. It was his own personal hardware store. So we got to looking and cobbling a bunch of fittings together, and we finally managed to get a connection, wound up being probably a foot long, between that spare valve my father had put in and the end of the water hose. And then we also finally cobbled together and got enough fittings that we managed to get the other end of the water hose to connect to the space heater. If I remember right, we actually had to go down to my buddy Jack's house and steal one of his water hoses because we didn't have enough at our house. But we had it all cobbled together, and we turned on the gas and at the line end and went in and cracked open the valve on the space heater just a tad. We could hear the gas hissing a little bit, and so we lit it, and we had ourselves a nice little fire. And so we used that thing several times. So one weekend it was particularly cold, and we decided, well, we got this space heater here, we've used it several times, we'll just turn that little puppy on and get us some heat. So my old buddy Jack squats down by the heater and he cracks the valve open just a hair and strikes a match, lights it up, but the flames are only about a 1/4 inch tall. There was just almost no gas there at all. So we said, well, I guess somebody must have turned it off back on that main line running from the gas well to the house. So since I'm totally colorblind and I can see in the dark, I obviously was the one that volunteered and said, let me go check that valve and make sure it's on. Well, when I walked out and closed the door because it was cold, we had a little bit of heat in there, and I just walked all the way straight across that 150 feet or so to where that valve was, and I reached down and felt of it, and it was wide open. So I thought, I wonder what's wrong with this. So as I'm walking back, kind of puzzled as to why we didn't have any gas pressure in the space heater, I happened to look, and there was enough light out that I could, well, like I said, I can see in the dark. And I looked down and the water hose had a kink in it. I'm sure everybody's had a water hose that's kinked and you couldn't get water through it. Well, guess what? You can't get gas through it either. So, seeing that, I was just like, well, I just reached down there and kicked it to kick the kink out of it. And when I did, the world lit up. Have you ever seen one of those shows where they're depicting an alien like inside a house and he pulls off his covering or whatever and suddenly it's so bright, and then they show an outside view and there's just beams of light coming out of every window and every crack that just light up everything? That's what I saw. The world lit up. There was actually light coming through every crack between every board, putting stripes on the grass in the yard, and then out each one of those windows on the end was just like a huge searchlight or something that just, I mean, it lit up bright. So, knowing what happened, I went, this can't be good. My buddy Jack's still in there. So I just immediately jumped down and grabbed up the hose and kinked it myself, and then the lights went out. Knowing my old buddy Jack was inside there, I was like, this can't be good. And then all of a sudden the door opened and he just kind of fell out on the ground. And so I hollered at him, said, you all right? And he said, yeah. I said, well, somebody's got to go turn this gas off somewhere on one end or the other. So he went inside, turned it off at the space heater, and so then I could turn loose of the hose I had kinked. So I went over there to him. Of course, we had flashlights, and took a flashlight. He had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and what hair he had on the front down, I guess you call it bangs on a girl, they were all gone. Almost looked just about like I do now with no hair. And his face was just bright, bright red. When things kind of settled down a little bit, we got back in, we lit the fire like normal, and had a nice warm junk house. And my buddy Jack was telling me, he was just like, man, I've never seen so much fire in my life. He said it went up the wall where the heater was. He said it rolled across the roof to the back side of the building. He said it was coming down the back wall when finally it went out. He said, I've never seen so much fire in my life. But fortunately, he was okay, wasn't injured other than lost a bunch of hair. Probably had the equivalent of a sunburn, light sunburn on his face, but he was all right. The good part about it is that we no longer had any spiders anywhere in that building. All the spiders and spider webs were gone. So we learned a valuable lesson that night. We learned that there are regulators on gas lines, and they're there for a reason. So the moral of this story is, if you're going to do something, then you need to do a little research. Of course, back in those days, we didn't have a search engine and the internet and all that. And we could have, I guess, contacted some professional and said, okay, how do we hook up this space heater safely? But boys will be boys. Fortunately, we lived through it. But you should always do a little bit of research, or just ask for a professional to come out because they know their business, and make sure any task you undertake is a safe task. Even in all your DIY projects around your house, make sure you're doing it safely. Sometimes I wonder how me and my old buddy Jack actually got to be the age that we are because of some of the crazy stuff we did when we were kids. But anyway, I hope you like this story. I got lots more of them hiding out, and I'll get to them hopefully about once a week or something like that. I don't know. Just depends on what's going on. So if you liked it, you know what to do. I'm not going to ask you to do it. You're on YouTube. You know how to do it. If you didn't like it, just don't come back. Pretty simple. So until next time, I appreciate y'all.